This is the Speaking of Writers podcast. I'm Steve Richards. The book is Same as It Ever Was. The author is Claire Lombardo. Claire Lombardo's debut novel, The Most Fun We Ever Had, was an instant New York Times bestseller, selling over 200,000 copies across formats, and it has been optioned by Reese Witherspoon and Laura Dern for an extended series featuring a memorably messy family and multifaceted marriage at its heart. The novel was hailed by critics as, quote, ambitious and brilliantly written by Jane Smiley, The Washington Post, heralding Lombardo as, quote, the literary love child of Jonathan Franzen and Anne Tyler. In her ambitious sophomore novel, Same as It Ever Was, coming out on paperback on April 22nd, Lombardo introduces us to an unforgettable cast of characters, this time by way of a singularly complicated protagonist, showcasing the consummate style, signature wit, knife-sharp dialogue, knotty familial bonds, and profound emotional intelligence that made her debut such a breakout family drama. Claire Lombardo, the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Most Fun We Ever Had, which, as I mentioned, was a Reese Witherspoon Book Club pick and has been optioned for television. She has taught at the Iowa Writers Workshop and lives in Minneapolis, where she joins me now from Minneapolis. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be here.
So, the idea for this story, where did it come from?
This book started out as short stories. I was writing these stories in graduate school when I was editing the book that became the most fun we ever had. And I just kind of happened upon this voice of the Julia character. And once it got in my head, she sort of wouldn't leave me. So I love short fiction. I love the form of short fiction. So I was kind of exploring this character via a series of short stories. And then during COVID, I had, amassed all of these pages, and I kind of had to figure out how to weave them into a novel and really figure out what the heart of the story was. But Julia's voice kind of started it out for me. She's I would say an outspoken protagonist. Yeah, just kind of wouldn't leave me alone.
So, not to give away too much, but what is Julia Ames like?
That's the question.
Hmm.
I think you'll get a different answer depending on who you ask. To me, Julia is, in most ways, utterly unremarkable. She's a very, average woman. I found her relatable. Some readers don't find her relatable. She is when we meet her, she is in her 50s. She lives in a nice suburb of Chicago. She has a husband she really likes and children she really likes. She is a librarian by trade. And she appears to have this really lovely life that she's made for herself. But then she runs into an old friend and starts thinking about her past and sort of how her life came to be. So she's complicated. She has a complicated childhood, as do we all, but Julia's is more complicated than most, I would say. And is just a person who doesn't move through the world as easily as most people do. And so she is, and then she meets Mark, her husband, who is sort of the exact opposite. He moves through the world freely and easily. And so I was really interested in exploring her via that dynamic in particular.
Yeah, Same as It Ever Was traverses this rocky terrain of real life, exploring new avenues, maternal ambivalence, intergenerational friendship. Why did you decide to explore those avenues?
The intergenerational friendship has always been something that is interesting to me, personally, just because for some reason, for most of my life, have always been fortunate to have female friends who are, 20 or 30 years older than I am. And people think that's really strange, and I think it's such a gift. So I was really interested in depicting that relationship in that way. And maternal ambivalence, I think. A lot of this book for me was via Julia exploring things that women aren't supposed to admit out loud. Julia has a lot of opinions about life and about her role as a woman in the world that aren't super palatable. And yet, the number of women I've heard from since this book has come out who say, thank you for expressing this, that sometimes you want to leave your children at a hotel for a few days, or that you don't always like your husband, or that you feel sort of pigeonholed in different roles. So in that way, again, I don't think Julia is unremarkable at all. She comes by it, I think, more honestly than most of us do. So I was interested in that, and I think you're not supposed to say as a woman that you don't like being a mother, or that you don't always want your children around, even though you love them. And so Julia was an interesting character to grapple with in that respect.
Claire, what's the story behind you becoming a writer, this being your sophomore novel?
Yeah, so I actually started my career in social work. I dropped out of college at 19, and I started working as a paralegal at the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless, which is a nonprofit. And I worked for public interest lawyers, primarily with kids, homeless kids and their parents, who were struggling to deal with the Chicago public school system. So that was an incredible job that I really, really loved. And I thought I would go on to do some kind of social work. And then I started social work school, and I started writing a novel at the same time, which the two couldn't really coexist. So I dropped out of social work school too. People don't like when I talk to their children, because my story is basically I dropped out of college several times,
Mm.
and things still worked out okay. But I think there's a lot of overlap between writing and social work, public service. And I think the primary thing is just a fascination with people, and a real sort of interest in having empathy and getting to know people whose lives don't look like yours. So yeah, I ended up kind of taking a very small savings account and applying to graduate school for fiction writing. And I ended up at the Iowa Writers Workshop, which I never thought would happen in a million years. And yeah, it's kind of been, from there, I feel so lucky to do. I work very hard, but I feel very lucky to do what I do, because there are plenty of writers who work very hard who, don't get to do the thing they love full time. So I'm constantly aware of that. What a great gift it is that I get to, that I have a job that I love as much as I do.
Claire, does writing energize you or exhaust you?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it energizes me more than not, except when I hate it, which is sometimes. I think it does energize me, though. I think writing is the thing that before I was doing it full time, I had, a bizarre series of jobs. I was a nanny. I did temp work. I had PR work, stuff like that, jobs that I didn't like, but that were, paying the rent. And writing was the thing that I would do on the subway during my lunch break, or when I got home at night when I was exhausted. But it was the thing that brought me joy. And it still does, not as much as it used to, I think, because once it's your job, you sort of, I think, look at it differently, and you kind of see, once you've gotten into the world of publishing and sort of seen how the sausage, I hate that expression, seen how the sausage is made.
Mm.
It changes your perspective a little. But I think for me, when I have the time to just sit at my desk and have fun, it's such a joy. So I would say it energizes me more than not.
Did you feel more pressure going into this sophomore effort?
I did, yes. I have talked to so many friends who have said the second novel is the worst one to write, and I very much felt that. And it's sort of it's a mixed bag, because I felt pressure because I had a readership, which is what you want. I never thought my first book would even be published, and the fact that it was, and found so many readers, was incredible. But then it sort of felt like, oh God, now there's people waiting,
Mm.
versus when you're writing your first novel. it's just pure fun. It's pure just sort of fantasy. And, maybe one day someone will read this. So I did. I really struggled with it. And again, I was writing a lot of the book during COVID when I was alone in my, old house in the middle of Iowa. And so it was definitely, it was much harder to write than the first book. Yeah.
Let's talk about the titles of your books here. I recently saw you give a talk at the Savannah Book Festival, a great book festival, by the way.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, and I'm a big Talking Heads fan, so same as it ever
Oh,
was,
great.
of course.
Yeah.
Talking Heads song, not based on that, of course, but how do you come up with the titles for your books?
Yeah, trial and error and failure, I think, is sort of the system I have followed thus far. Both of my books started out with different titles and got pretty far into the publishing process with those titles. And then my very diplomatic and lovely editor had to call me and say, Claire, nobody likes these titles except you.
Hmm.
So both times I kind of had to regroup. For Same as It Ever Was, the original title was World of Fools, which is a Bee Gees reference. And so the music is a big part of the novel. It's a big part of Julia's life. It's a big part of Mark and Julia's marriage. It's a big part of my life. And I also got through college exclusively titling my papers using song lyrics. It was like a challenge I posed for myself. So my editor knew that. And so she and I, for weeks, were kind of going back and forth. And then she called me one day and said, "What about, the most obvious song in the world about waking up in a life that you don't recognize?" And it just sort of fit. I'm also a huge Talking Heads fan.
Mm.
And the Talking Heads are very much the sort of era of music that Julia exists in. So it just kind of fit. And I've had readers say, I don't normally read literary fiction, or I would never have picked this book up, but I'm a huge Talking Heads
Mm.
fan, and which is cool. Yeah, it's a big part of my life, so it's nice to connect with readers in that way.
And what is next for you in your writing?
That's the question.
Hmm.
I'm working on a new project, very slowly. And I'm just kind of seeing where it goes. And it is very much that, that fun, free-flowing stage of writing when you don't really have to think about where the project is going. So I'm wading into that. It's always kind of a delicate balance promoting one book while working on another. So the paperback of Same as It Ever Was, as you said, is coming out. So I'm kind of transitioning from being in Julia's world and moving into another one.
Do you have any writing quirks? You said earlier that you pretty much can write anywhere.
I can, yeah. I got pretty adaptable with that. In part, when I was writing, when I was doing other jobs, but I also, in graduate school, had like terrible neighbors who were super loud. So I got pretty good at fleeing my house and working wherever I could. Now my quirks, I have an office that I really love. I have a little dog who you can't see because she's sitting underneath my chair, but she's a big, her staring at me has become a big part of my writing process. And I'm also a big storyboarder. It's normally right behind me. I just moved, so it's not up, but I do kind of I have a huge foam core board that I kind of map all of my both of my books out. I do it for short stories too. And so that's a big part of my process that um, yeah, it has sort of been a mainstay.
So you're a plotter, not a pantser, it sounds like.
Mm, Actually, no, I would say I am a pantser. I only storyboard after I've written. I like going in blind and stumbling around, usually for a very long time. And so I don't do outlines, excuse me, until after I've written the whole story. Because I feel like I'm very much a planner in my life, but not in my writing. And I think I've always just felt with novels, with stories, I like to be agendaless because I feel like if you have an agenda, that it very well may change, at some point during the process. And that's good. I think it's good for stories to kind of veer off in their own direction. So I like to leave room for that to happen. So yeah, I try to go in with zero expectations, zero idea of where the story's going, where the story will end, which is terrifying. It makes the sort of beginning part really overwhelming, but I think it benefits the work for me overall.
Claire, what's the best thing about being an author?
Oh God, it's the best job. I feel so lucky that I get to do it. The best thing is, gosh. I think the people I get to meet, I think reading is such a sort of singular experience. No person is going to come at a book in the same way as someone else. And so the readers I've gotten to meet who are so generous with their sharing their reading experience, sharing their own stories, people I never otherwise would have encountered. And I think it's just a really wonderful way to connect with people in a time where that feels more challenging than it used to. So I would say that's the highlight. Also that I get free books in the mail all the time. That's not bad either. Yeah.
No, not at all. The book is same as it ever was. It is out in hardcover now. It's coming out in paperback on April 22nd. And you can connect with Claire on Instagram at Claire_Lombardo. And she has a website too, ClaireLombardo.com. Claire, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Steve. This was lovely. Great to talk to you.
Thank you. Great talking to you. And hit the subscribe button on this podcast. This is the Speaking of Writers podcast. I'm Steve Richards.